Watching The Psychedelic Investor. So I'm actually not 100% sure if we're even live right now. Hopefully we are, and I'm not just babbling like an idiot. But if I am live, then today is the day. We're finally getting the MindMed Q4 or end of year 2020 rather financial results and conference call. So this is going to be really important because throughout the day, or throughout the call rather, we're going to get to hear from the leaders of MindMed on all the major issues that MindMed is facing. So hopefully we're going to hear some news about. Give me 1 second. Boss, there. Are we live? Go to our channel. We may be having difficulties right now, but I'm just going to keep talking as if we don't. And hopefully I am, in fact, live right now. So if I am, then yeah. So hopefully we're going to get some updates on specifically Project Lucy. Okay, perfect. We are live. I'm not seeing any of your comments. I'm going to try to figure out how to do that. Yeah, sorry, guys. This is my first ever live stream, so I'm a bit not 100% sure how to do this. Hey, boss, when you open it there, do you see comments? Perfect. I'm just going to grab this so I can see comments. Fantastic, fantastic, fantastic. You guys are amazing. So yeah, hopefully we're going to be getting some updates on Project Lucy because that actually finished its phase 2A trial somewhat recently, and they are working with the FDA to move into phase 2B trials. So I mentioned in a video somewhat recently, and by the way, whenever this conference call starts, which it's supposed to start any second now, I'm just going to cut myself off and I will put that on for you guys to watch. But yeah, so I mentioned in a video somewhat recently when I was going over all of the changes in the investors deck, that before they used to have a readout for Project Lucy in phase 1 or phase 2A rather, that was scheduled for Q1 of this year. But in the updated book, they kind of just took that out. So I'm hoping that somebody's going to ask a question about that, or just management is going to give an update on that in general, because that's something that's very important for us to know and something that is basically essential for the future of the company. And but yeah, and then also they finished the phase 1 trials for 18MC last year. They finished the phase 1 trials for the ADHD trials using LSD microdoses. So all of these things that they've finished that we haven't gotten any data on yet, hopefully we're going to be getting updates on. So if you guys have any questions that you want me to answer in the next couple minutes, you can type them into the live stream right now. And then the second that they go live, I'll switch over. But if you have any questions, we'll get to it right now. If not, I'll just keep on rambling like a crazy person. I'm kind of used to it by now. It's kind of my shtick. Also, if any baseball fans are out there, happy opening day. And if you're a Yankees fan, well, get stuffed because you're going to lose today. And the Blue Jays are totally going to win this game today. Yeah, I don't even know how many people are watching. 16 people are watching. Awesome. So yeah, I guess, I think that the call might be going live. Let me see here. Give me a second.
Coordinating today's conference. Leading the call today will be MindMed CEO, J.R. Ron. Please email any questions you may have to investors@mindmed.co. These will be addressed following the introduction. J.R., you may now begin the call.
Thank you, Colin. Good morning and welcome to MindMed's 2020 year-end earnings call as we continue our mission to discover, develop, and deploy psychedelic-inspired medicines and therapies to alleviate suffering and promote health. I am J.R. Ron, the co-founder and CEO of MindMed. We appreciate everyone taking the time to join our call today. I am also joined today by our Executive President, Dr. Miri Halfman-Wormley, Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Dan Carlin, and our Chief Development Officer, Robert Barrow, and lastly, our Chief Financial Officer, Dave Cooper. As always, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that this conference call will contain forward-looking information, which may include but is not limited to statements with respect to anticipated business plans or strategies of MindMed. Forward-looking statements are made as of today's date and involve known and unknown risks, uncertainties, and other factors which may cause the actual results, performance, or achievements of MindMed to be materially different from the forward-looking statements. We draw your attention to the full disclaimer contained in our filings on SEDAR and EDGAR. We have scheduled a maximum of 1 hour for this call. We think it's important to stress our attention to clinical trial safety in the face of COVID-19. As the vaccines continue to roll out globally, we maintain increased safety measures at our trial sites. While there is no immediate impact directly to our ongoing clinical trials with subjects and our partners, we continue to monitor the dynamic situation of COVID-19. We have seen some minor complications to the logistics of our supply chain and manufacturing capabilities due to increased travel restrictions and import and export regulations imposed during COVID-19 that many biotech companies are currently experiencing. Internally, the company has continued to benefit from our geographically distributed operational structure with the recent team member additions of Robert Barrow, Dr. Dan Carlin, Bradford Cross, and the entire 24-person team at Healthmode. The year of 2020 turned out to be a transformational time for MindMed as we went through significant growth and maturation. We remain focused on our objective of building a comprehensive tool set for patients and therapists based on psychedelic substances. As always, we remain committed to our strategy of execution through rigorous science and preclinical and clinical trials. With this approach, we seek to transform once stigmatized compounds into medicines approved for marketing by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and equivalent foreign regulatory authorities. Our drug development programs will continue to be conducted in strict compliance with drug development, regulatory, and supervisory bodies such as the FDA and relevant national healthcare authorities. I will now go into detail on our advancements in 2020 and update you on the progress of our ongoing clinical trials, strategy, and overall operations. Team updates. We're extremely excited for the opportunity to hire top-tier talent to MindMed. With that said, I'm honored to announce the addition of Rob Barrow. Rob has been appointed as Chief Development Officer. He has more than a decade of experience leading drug development programs aimed at identifying and testing novel treatments in a wide range of disease conditions under FDA and EMA regulations. In his most recent position, Rob served as Director of Drug Development and Discovery at the USONA Institute, where he oversaw preclinical, clinical, and regulatory development efforts for all of USONA's development programs in psychedelics. At USONA, he was responsible for launching the Phase 2 clinical program for psilocybin in the treatment of major depressive disorder and for obtaining breakthrough therapy designation for the program from the FDA. In addition to Rob, we have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Dan Carlin and Bradford Cross to the team as Chief Medical Officer and Chief Technology Officer. Dr. Carlin previously held several leadership roles at Pfizer's Neuroscience Research Unit, ultimately serving as head of clinical informatics and regulatory strategy for digital medicine. He is board certified in psychiatry, addiction medicine, and clinical informatics. Both Dan and Bradford have added serious firepower to our ongoing digital medicine efforts. Bradford was a founding partner at a deep tech venture capital fund, Data Collective, also known as DCVC, in Silicon Valley, and also founded Prismatic, a personalized AI-driven newsfeed that became part of the IP underlying LinkedIn's newsfeed and content classification. I look forward to working with Bradford and his entire engineering team and product team as we chart new territory for the company and building a comprehensive mental health platform that we call Albert, ultimately to complement the drug development engine that we are also building at MindMed. We recently announced just this week an update to our scientific advisory board. As we further bolster our scientific advisory board, we are excited to welcome the addition of Dr. Robert Malenka, an accomplished neuroscientist and psychiatry professor from Stanford University. Dr. Malenka is going to act as chair of our company's scientific advisory board. Dr. Malenka is an elected member of the National Academy of Sciences and the National Academy of Medicine, as well as an elected fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the American College of Neuropsychopharmacology. He has served on the National Advisory Council on Drug Abuse and as a counselor for the Society for Neuroscience in the American College of Neuropsychopharmacology. He is well known for his landmark contributions to the understanding of brain plasticity mechanisms and has extensive experience as an advisor to various pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies. We are honored to have him join MindMed as chair of the Scientific Advisory Board and begin working on new projects with Dr. Malenka. I will now address the Healthmode and our Albert division. As mentioned earlier, we are very fortunate to have integrated the entire Healthmode family from our recently announced acquisition of Healthmode. The acquisition will help MindMed move towards building a full-stack digital mental health platform for psychedelic medicine. With the acquisition, MindMed gains access to Healthmode's intellectual property, platforms for drug trials, and its entire 24-person digital medicine team. MindMed will incorporate Healthmode's machine learning, engineering, product development, and operations employees based in Silicon Valley, New York City, Bratislava, and Prague into its established digital medicine division, Albert. MindMed seeks to establish Albert as an industry-leading full-stack digital mental health platform capable of enabling the launch and commercialization of psychedelic-assisted therapies and medicines at scale for patients. Our mission is to make MindMed as much a digital medicine company as a drug development company. We believe the future of modern mental health care and psychedelic medicine ultimately will rely on improving infrequent, self-reported, and observed measures for mental health to a paradigm where the continual digital measurement of our mind and body is as vital as the drug treatment itself. In effect, we see a future mental health treatment paradigm where potential drug products such as our LSD therapy might be prescribed alongside software application programming interfaces to prepare the patient for treatment, accompany the treatment, and optimally monitor the aftercare of one's anxiety disorder through our platform partners. I will now address the Nasdaq initial listing application. To begin, I want to discuss our Nasdaq initial listing application. As we previously announced, MindMed has filed an initial listing application to list its subordinate voting shares on the Nasdaq capital market. The listing of such shares on Nasdaq is subject to MindMed meeting the quantitative and qualitative requirements to list and remains subject to Nasdaq listing approval. Despite our continued desire to list our subordinate shares on the Nasdaq capital market, there can be no assurance that MindMed's initial listing application will be approved. As publicly announced yesterday, a preliminary base shelf prospectus was filed in Canada on SEDAR, and a Form F-10 registration statement with the same preliminary base shelf prospectus was filed in the United States with the SEC on EDGAR. I'll now move to advancements in Basel, Switzerland, the birthplace of LSD and modern psychedelic science. MindMed is excited to continue its relationship with the Layla lab at University Hospital Basel. UHB has achieved a leading position in the academic and scientific realm with LSD, MDMA, and other psychedelic research. Our strategy remains the same: translate the clinical and research work done by UHB and its leadership position into commercial drug trials conducted in compliance with FDA requirements and the requirements of other regulatory agencies. We are already doing this with Project Lucy and aim to do this with additional programs. Project Lucy remains one of our lead commercial drug development programs for the treatment of anxiety disorders with LSD. MindMed is on schedule to initiate a Phase 2b human safety and efficacy trial that will focus on treating anxiety with our LSD product candidate, administered in specific therapeutic settings, subject to the FDA accepting our IND. MindMed's clinical and regulatory team has completed a pre-IND briefing package and submitted it to the FDA and met with the FDA for a pre-IND meeting in December 2020. Data from a recently completed Phase 1 dose range finding study by the Layla lab, together with multiple other studies conducted both in healthy volunteers and subjects over the past 10 years, has helped define the protocol proposed to the FDA for the Phase 2b clinical trial. Following the pre-IND meeting with the FDA, MindMed's team is now working to submit an IND for the treatment of an anxiety disorder in Q3 of this year. Our FDA regulatory efforts and our clinical strategy for LSD are being led by Dr. Halpern Wormley and Robert Barrow. Project Flow. Our Project Flow is our Phase 2a study evaluating microdosing of LSD for treating adult ADHD. We have successfully reached an agreement on the study protocol with both the Swiss and Dutch health authorities for both sites where the study will be run. To our knowledge, this is the first green light of a protocol from a regulatory agency to proceed with a commercial clinical trial testing the efficacy of LSD microdosing. MindMed is diligently working to prepare the GMP medication for the study, and our site coordinators are focusing on subject recruitment strategies to optimize the execution of the study. We anticipate dosing to begin in subjects in Q3 at both of our sites in Switzerland and the Netherlands. Our LSD MDMA study. Moving to the further R&D clinical updates, we were excited to announce the clinical trial measuring and evaluating MDMA and LSD used in combination in the human body. The trial has started and is being conducted at the University Hospital Basel, LSD Lab in Basel, Switzerland. Combined MDMA LSD treatments have the potential to create next-generation psychedelic-assisted therapy paradigms. When added to a psychedelic-assisted therapy session, MDMA has the potential to reduce some known rare negative side effects that may occur while using LSD or other classic psychedelics on their own. In regards to our LSD Neutralizer Study, we were excited to announce the start of a study to better understand the effect and potential use of catasserin, a substance intended to shorten and stop an LSD trip during a therapy session. This discovery, when further developed and if approved, may act as an emergency off switch for psychedelic-assisted therapies. Specifically, MindMed is working in collaboration with UHB's LSD Lab on the Phase 1 double-blind, placebo-controlled, random-order, two-period crossover design clinical trial evaluating the effect of catasserin on the acute response to LSD in healthy subjects after LSD administration. The study is being conducted at the University Hospital Basel LSD Lab and is expected to be completed by year-end. As a result of focusing on LSD-assisted therapies, MindMed hopes to innovate additional features that can make its product candidates most suitable for a therapeutic setting and thereby create the best possible patient journey and experience. Turning now to our partnership with MindShift Compounds in Switzerland. MindMed has recently bolstered its new drug discovery efforts with the announcement of a new partnership with Swiss startup pharmaceutical company MindShift Compounds AG. MindMed plans to develop and patent next-gen psychedelic compounds with psychedelic or empathogenic properties. As part of this partnership, MindMed and MindShift Compounds plans to develop next-gen psychedelic and empathogenic substances together. The first initial compounds have already been synthesized by MindShift Compounds AG, and related patent applications were filed by MindMed. MindMed plans to begin first-in-human Phase 1 clinical trials as early as Q1 2022 through its existing clinical trial platform for psychedelic and empathogenic compounds in Switzerland. We will use this platform to build further IP. R&D collaborations on psilocybin. On a similar note, MindMed has been conducting R&D work on psilocybin in collaboration with the University of Hospital Basel's LSD Lab. An ongoing study is comparing and contrasting the altered states of consciousness induced by psilocybin and LSD. MindMed is interested in understanding how psilocybin or LSD affects humans differently so it can design better late-stage trials or potentially combine substances in next-generation psychedelic-assisted therapies. I will now discuss our Phase 1 study that completed relating to dosing effects of LSD. Data from a recently completed Phase 1 dose range finding study by the LSD Lab helped inform the protocol design and the dosing regimen proposed to the FDA for our potential Phase 2b clinical trial. As previously announced and published in collaboration with UHB LSD Lab, we found that a dose of 200 micrograms of LSD was shown to induce a greater ego dissolution than a lesser 100 microgram dose. Ego dissolution is thought to be one of the key therapeutic potentials of the psychedelic experience and psychedelic-assisted therapy process. This study will help to further inform later stage trials that MindMed is undertaking. We now turn to our LSD study in the Netherlands, LSD Microdosing. On January 12, 2021, the corporation announced an LSD study evaluating the potential benefits of LSD microdosing, in addition to our ongoing commercial drug trial that is beginning for adult ADHD. Specifically, this second study will be a randomized placebo-controlled study evaluating the effects of daytime and evening administration of low doses of LSD on cognitive performance, sleep quality, mood, neuroplasticity markers, emotion regulation, quality of life, and immune system response. The study will provide an additional research pathway from MindMed's psychedelic microdosing division and will immediately integrate with MindMed's plans in digital therapeutics through its newly formed Albert unit for digital medicine. MindMed is integrating innovative digital tracking devices and software into the study to better assess LSD's effects on various digital clinical markers on the human body. The new study will be conducted in collaboration with Dr. Kim Koopers of Maastricht University in the Netherlands, a global leading authority on the microdosing of psychedelics. 18MC. MindMed continues to make progress in advancing our addiction medicine program. Our lead addiction medicine candidate, 18MC, is a synthetic analog of the natural psychedelic substance ibogaine. Extensive testing in animal models of substance use disorders suggests efficacy similar to ibogaine. Additionally, preclinical data on 18MC suggests a mitigation of key safety risks associated with ibogaine. Most notably, 18MC does not appear to have proarrhythmic or neurotoxic effects, which supported selection as a lead drug candidate and potentially safer alternative to ibogaine. MindMed is developing 18MC as a treatment for substance use disorders and withdrawal with a novel mechanism of action. Unlike available treatments which center around therapies that activate and or block the opioid receptor, 18MC acts by addressing the dysregulation of dopamine in the reward and pleasure centers of the midbrain, which are a hallmark of substance use disorders and central to many addictive behaviors. Under its open IND application for 18MC, MindMed plans to initiate a phase 2 clinical trial of 18MC in the treatment of opioid withdrawal as a key indicator of the clinical activity in the fourth quarter of 2021 or later, subject to completion of the ongoing phase 1 single and multiple ascending dose trial. I'd like now to transfer the call to Dave Gieber, our CFO, to give us an overview of the financials.
Thanks, JR. Our financial statements for the year end December 31st, 2020 were audited by RSM Canada LLP and have been approved by our audit committee and our board of directors. The complete financial statements, along with related management discussion and analysis, can be found in the System for Electronic Document Analysis and Retrieval, the electronic filing system for disclosure documents of issuers across Canada at www.cedar.com. I'll provide a brief summary of our year-end financial statements. As a reminder, all figures are expressed in US dollars. MindMed continues to build its operating capabilities and to expand its clinical research and development activities. Our net and comprehensive loss for the year ended December 31st was $35.1 million, made up primarily of research and development costs of $15.4 million, general and administrative expenses of $7.7 million, and non-cash items, including share-based compensation of $8.8 million and loss on the revaluation of a derivative liability of $0.9 million. Research and development expenses for the year were comprised of payroll and consulting fees of $3.2 million, costs to acquire data and studies of $2.8 million, clinical research and regulatory costs of $4.1 million, and manufacturing related costs of $3.8 million and license fees of $700,000. There were other R&D costs of $739,000 as well. Research and development activities include all direct and indirect costs for the programs, compensation, licensing fees for intellectual property, as well as manufacturing, clinical, and regulatory costs. General and administrative expenses for the 2020 year consisted of payroll and consulting fees of $2.7 million, marketing and investor relations of $2.4 million, legal fees of $814,000, accounting and audit of $301,000, and $1.5 million in other G&A. Turning to our balance sheet, our cash balance was $80.1 million and working capital was $78.7 million at December 31st. The net proceeds from our financing activities during the 12 months ended December 31st was $97.4 million. And cash used in operating activities after removing non-cash items from the net loss was $24.2 million for that period. With that, I'll turn the presentation back to JR.
Thanks, Dave. That completes the formal part of the presentation. Miri, Rob, Dan, and I will now address questions from our recently measured 180,000 independent shareholders and equity analysts covering MindMed. Our first question comes from Tanya Gonzalez from Canaccord Genuity. She asks, could you provide more color on the elevated plasma levels of 18-MC you've witnessed in phase 1 trials? Were there any AEs associated with this, and what does it mean for future trial design and dosing? I'm going to turn this over to our Chief Development Officer, Rob Barra.
Thanks, JR. And thanks, Tanya, for the question. I just know that it's very common for human exposures to differ from animal exposures on a dose normalized basis, and this is just exactly what we've observed in our first-in-human phase 1 studies of 18-MC. While the relative exposures in humans are greater, we have not seen any dose-limiting adverse events in our clinical trials to date. It's a bit premature at this stage to discuss the full impact on future trial designs, but an increase in the dose normalized exposure in humans compared to animals could mean that we have to only administer lower doses in humans than we would in animals to achieve the same level of same plasma levels of 18-MC.
Tanya also has a follow-up question directed at Dan. What kind of revenue will Healthmode contribute to MindMed? Dan?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, JR, and thanks, Tanya. When Healthmode was acquired, we had a book of business to develop measures and conduct research with other sponsors in the space. Some of this revenue is continuing to date and will continue, but I think it's really important to say that the priority for our digital efforts and for the digital team is to focus on developing products that will enable the core research, development, and deployment activities of MindMed. So functioning as the Albert division of MindMed, the digital capabilities which were acquired through the Healthmode acquisition will still engage outside sponsors to collaborate and co-develop measurements and interventions, so long as those collaborations are strategically aligned with MindMed's overall mission. Those collaborations themselves may be revenue generating, but it's really important to point out that near-term revenue is not the mission of the digital effort. In reality, what we are trying to do is advancing the science that enables us to build a technology platform that will play a key role in the core mission of MindMed, which is, of course, developing and deploying psychedelic-inspired medications.
Okay, I'm going to take this question from Nicholas Galifi, who's emailed it and also asked it on Zoom here. So Nicholas asked, would you be able to talk about the infrastructure that MindMed is going to build to scale these medicines? I think it's a really great question, and I think we're still going to take some time to totally answer what is going to be the needed infrastructure to deliver psychedelic medicines. I think the entire industry needs to answer that question. It's a seminal question. There are some out there that believe building clinics is the way forward, and I think as a management team, I think our view on, well, actually, I know our view on building out clinics across the United States as an example. We don't really believe that to be a scalable way to launch drugs, right? We don't believe that real estate is necessarily a scalable business model for a drug company, a drug development company. And so our focus really is going to be, how do we amalgamate the existing care system that does exist for mental health care? While limited, there are, I think something like 100,000 psychologists out there. There's 28,000 psychiatrists, and then of course therapists as well. And how do we ultimately get them to coalesce together to help us launch these potential medicines in the future after an approval? I think we have some time to figure that out, but not a whole lot of time. If we look at this, maybe 4 years maximum to build that infrastructure. I ultimately believe, coming from the technology industry, is that the easiest way to amalgamate and get people to work together is through technology. And so I think we're going to focus on Albert as a platform to ultimately onboard therapists, psychiatrists, even maybe some MDs that can help us supervise these sessions. But ultimately, we need to get the FDA to weigh in some ways. But as Rob our chief development officer always reminds me, the FDA doesn't necessarily regulate the delivery of medicine, right? So I think we're still determining how is the best way to build this infrastructure. What we do know is that the current solutions are just simply not working, right? They're not providing access to all communities here in America. And that's not good. Our objective as a company is not to make psilocybin available for those on Fifth Avenue. Our objective is to make this as wide a business as possible, so that as many people can access these medicines that actually need them. And by doing so, we actually probably will have a very, very much larger business than some of our competitors if we take that approach. And so as we build infrastructure, we want to make sure that that infrastructure is inclusive, because it's going to build a bigger business. So that will be our focus. And I look forward to working on this more with Dan and Bradford and the rest of the Healthmode team that's just joined us, and how we're going to build this comprehensive platform. And we're now working on that. And I look to come back in the next couple earnings call and show progress on what we are building, because I think it's important. And I don't think anyone else really in this space is necessarily thinking about how do you actually scale psychedelic medicines. Anybody can build a clinic. How do you actually scale it for millions of patients? That's what MindMed is solving for. I'm going to move on here. And this one really is, I think, a good question from Miri, also from Nicholas Galifi. Will you be posting a readout of your phase 2A LSD experiential dose results? Miri?
Yeah, thanks, JR. So this is the study which will end at the end of the year. So we looked at the study blinded, we get some information, but the study is it's running. It's a long study. It runs now since 3.5 years, and we will unblind and analyze only at the end of the year. But we used another 10 studies that were in UHB with LSD. One of them was mentioned by JR. It's the dose finding studies, very elaborate dose finding studies. And we used this data and the analysis to guide us for the protocol that we presented for the 2B study to the FDA.
And Miri, while I have you, I have another question here. Have you started the LSD microdose and Albert trial yet? And if not, when should we anticipate news on this? Yeah. I guess they're asking about the LSD microdosing.
Yeah, I think that the two studies, our own 2A microdose study, the LSD microdose study, which is looking at adult ADHD, is planned to start in Q3, like we mentioned before, in the 2 European centers, and it's on time. The other study, the Maastricht University LSD study, which is an academic study, this one has now been submitted to ethics, and it's planned to start imminently. So it will start in the summer, probably June, July, or August. And this study will use digital measurements mainly for the sleep parameters, for slow wave sleep, sleep quality, quality and quantity, and also for a number of cognitive performance measures. This will be a first study where LSD will be given morning and evening as part of the parameters of the study. So the digital measurements that we will be using, in fact, we decided on them prior to the Healthmode acquisition, but now they align very nicely with the sort of data that we will digitally analyze for this study. So this study will be the first one using digital measurements. And like I said, submitted to ethics, so it will start imminently.
This is, I think, this isn't really specific to MindMed, but this is a question about microdosing, and I think this is a good question for Rob to tackle. There was an article recently that showed LSD microdosing was a placebo effect. This study was not ideal and had many flaws. Can you respond to how your study is better and what data do you expect? Rob?
Yeah, thanks, JR. So the recent study that was published on microdosing of psychedelics, we find that to be particularly interesting, and we always encourage the conduct of these studies that reach out to large populations and have interesting approaches. That said, the reference study was really fraught with limitations, make it really hard to generalize or interpret in the context of a drug development program. At the highest level, the study was conducted in healthy individuals from the general population who were currently microdosing of their own accord. And it was not focusing on improving any conditions or disorders or disease. It was actually looking at improvement, making healthy people healthier. We know from a large body of literature that it's a very difficult thing to demonstrate. And it's really no surprise that you wouldn't see a large separation between a placebo and any kind of treatment in that kind of paradigm. Just to be clear, we are developing therapeutics for the treatment of mental health disorders, not to improve psychological well-being in healthy individuals. More specifically about the study, there are some particular weaknesses in terms of the blinding procedures, in terms of the interpretation of the data from our perspective. And it's really difficult for us to draw scientific conclusions from that work. Again, we are very, very happy to see all of this work, the explosion of academic interest in studying psychedelics, including microdosing. But we don't see, we don't interpret the results the same way. We do not believe that they speak at all to the potential for LSD or other psychedelics to have a clinical benefit when dosed at low levels repeatedly. And we are excited to continue with our studies to actually assess those impacts in these populations.
There's a question here from Louis Martucci, and he asks, soliciting or rendering MindMed goods and services through means of current modern technology is the direction I want to see this company go. Can you please explain how and when this will be implemented? Dan, maybe you can talk a little bit more to this as how we're thinking about it.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for the question, Louis. So we agree with you. Modern digital technology is absolutely essential to the future of the deployment and development of psychedelics. At this point, our technology work is focused on building the platform to enable our core research and development aspects of the business. As these are the critical path steps to bring the products to market, right? As Rob has talked about, with regulatory pathways we have to go down to bring new medicines to the market and to get those full regulatory approvals. In parallel, as we anticipate the regulatory approvals, the focus of the digital platform efforts will increasingly shift to technology that can enable the deployment of the medicines by facilitating a number of patient-related factors, including patient engagement, measurement and categorization of symptoms and diagnoses, assistance in monitoring medication adherence and medication dosing sessions, and monitoring patients in the follow-up after a session. Those measurements could assist in detecting relapse so that patients can be assisted in staying well rather than suffering the sorts of cyclical setbacks that we see in folks with anxiety and depression. So we really prefer to be able to identify when people are starting to slide back into illness and prevent that backsliding rather than reacting to it. The key component of this enabling technology is that the more that it gets used, the more data passes through the model. And as those models see more and more patients, more data, more cycles of treatment and response, the models themselves, the technology itself becomes increasingly powerful. And the models then are better able to detect and predict clinical outcomes, and ultimately will be able to inform the sorts of interventions that we might pick for an individual based on the characteristics we identify about them. So we see that this deployment technology and our pushing that out into the marketplace should precede our clinical approvals for drugs, but will more or less follow the time course for deployment of drugs over time.
Thanks, Dan. There's a few questions here about Nasdaq. So Josh Goldman asking, what time frame does the MindMed management expect the Nasdaq uplisting to be approved and for MindMed to begin trading on Nasdaq? Look, we encourage you to review our publicly disclosed statements. That's all that we can discuss at this time. We know that everybody wants to answer this question. Please see the publicly disclosed statements. Thank you. I think we've covered most of the themes here in the questions. I'm just looking if there's anything left. I think we've got everything. So we thank you all for your dedication to the company. there's a very strong tribe here supporting MindMed. It's a very impassioned shareholder base, and we really value that. We have to do the work at the FDA, and we have to build a technical infrastructure. But at the end of the day, we're all humans, and we're fighting against something that is hurting everyone globally. Mental health and addiction, continue to pervade society, and unfortunately, after COVID-19, I think it's going to get worse. I don't see it getting better. And so, companies like ours, I believe, are going to be very, very important. And so we thank everyone for their support, and we're going to continue on our mission. We are not going to solve these problems overnight. It's going to take time. But I think if we stay focused, we will hopefully prevail. And so thank you all, and have a good spring. The tide seems to be turning out there. So let's hope it turns into a good summer too. Thank you so much for your time.
Alrighty, guys. So we are back. So a couple main takeaways that I had there. First and foremost, I guess we'll start with the Nasdaq. You heard him there at the end. He said that basically we can't talk about it. So I'm not really sure what exactly or when exactly we'll be seeing this. So they did mention how they filed those forms like the F10 for the SEC rather. But I really have zero idea if that means that it's going to be coming soon, or if that's just one of the many steps they have to take in the process. Based on the tone that JR and others had there, I would say that it would be likely the latter, that this isn't coming for any time soon. Although, of course, there's always hope. What do I know? If any of you watched Aaron from Departure Stocks video recently, he talked about how this was one of the last stepping stones in the process of getting accepted into the Nasdaq. So hopefully that's true, but I don't really know. And again, based on his tone there, it didn't really seem like the case. Just as a side note, I kind of wish that MindMed would get like a hype man to do these conference calls, because at times it was a little bit, I don't want to use the word boring, but just very monotone, and that can distract from the good things that are going on. So yeah, it's just kind of a little side note. I wish it was more interactive. Maybe if we had some video on that, it would have been more interactive, but that's really nothing important when it comes to the business. In terms of how their medicines are doing, so they did kind of walk through each of the programs they're doing, but they didn't really provide any new updates. They just kind of talked about how each program was more or less on track, and if it did fall behind, it would only be by a couple months. And yeah, in their pre-made written statements, they didn't give us really too much new details, which was a little bit disappointing. But in the questions that they took, there were some new details. And oh no, it looks like I just deleted all the notes I took. Well, that is wonderful, cool. So yeah, some of the questions that were super important the main one, the most interesting one, was about Albert, I think, and about how to scale up the process of expanding these medicines. And he kind of took a little dig, it sounded like, at Compass Pathways. He made a mention how other companies' main focus on scaling up was by using clinics, and that's exactly the Compass Pathway method. They're really trying to train all these therapists in-house and then scale up one by one all these clinics. And J.R. Ron basically said that this isn't really feasible if we want to do this quickly, if we want to scale this solution to the millions or hundreds of millions of people that need this right away. We can't spend a decade or 2 decades creating our own clinics, expanding across the United States, across Canada, across the world. We really need a new solution for the 21st century, which they expect to be Albert. So again, they didn't really mention too many details on how this would work, but it would involve collaborating globally with MDs, with psychiatrists, with therapists, and working through a digital platform to connect all of this infrastructure that already exists to create this kind of new infrastructure to develop and give their drugs and not produce, but deploy their drugs across the world. So that was really kind of the main difference between Compass and MindMed. There is Compass is working on creating their own in-house therapies, not therapies, but their own in-house protocols and scaling these up. Whereas MindMed really is trying to find this already existing infrastructure and then kind of add to this infrastructure. So yeah, when it comes to LSD microdosing trials, they have 2 of them. As we already know, they have the one for ADHD for adults, and then they have the one that's just testing how it affects healthy people already. So that one is actually, to me, the more exciting one, the latter one there, because they're going to be collecting all this data on like sleep measures. They're going to be collecting data on mental measures, and then they're going to really see how this affects kind of a wider population. But again, they didn't really give any data on how the phase 1 trials went, which is a little bit disappointing to me. I kind of wish we got more data on these, but I guess we're just going to have to wait. That's the nature of the game. So what was really interesting was how they mentioned the placebo study that was done at the Imperial College of London. So for those of you who watched the video or who remember, the Imperial College of London, they did a study on the effects of microdosing a variety of different substances on people's health. And they basically said all the positive effects of microdosing came from the placebo effect. And they said this because, yes, the people that were taking psychedelic microdoses, they had great effects, but the people who were taking placebos, thinking they were taking microdoses, also had the same effects. So the authors of that study said that 100% just the placebo effect. So what the team here says, MindMed's team says, is much of the same criticisms that we had on our channel. First and foremost, they were using people who were already microdosing LSD. So in my mind, it's almost like they're testing the effects of people who unknowingly stop microdosing rather than testing the effects of people who have started microdosing in the first place. So they really should have used microdosing or psychedelic virgins, I guess, because the conclusions they came to didn't really make sense based on how the method that they built the study. But that's just my opinion. But it was very interesting how the MindMed team had similar opinions on it as we did. So I guess I'm gonna more or less leave it here. No need to drag this on for an hour or two. We'll probably go back and listen to it, and I will find my notes that I deleted and make another video on this at some time in the future, perhaps just like a little part of it, because a lot of it, like I said, wasn't exactly new information. We didn't get really any trial data, unfortunately, which is what I was hoping for. They are going to be doing a conference not too long from now, I think in like a month or something, and it was actually called a special meeting when they filed for it. So hopefully in that special meeting, which I have zero idea what it's about, by the way, but hopefully in that special meeting, we will get some more data on these clinical trials. Because again, guys, that's all that really matters. Like, yes, Nasdaq is exciting, but at the end of the day, if their medicines work, us as investors are going to be very happy. If their medicines don't work, then we're not going to be happy. And it doesn't matter if they get accepted in the Nasdaq tomorrow. If in 5 years their medicines don't work, well, sucks to suck still. So that's what we got to wait for. Those are the most important data points. And unfortunately, we didn't really get any of those here. We just kind of got very high level. The studies are going well. The studies are progressing. We can't talk about it much at the moment. And when we can talk about it, we'll tell you, which, I mean, I guess is fair. You can't expect them to do anything more than what they can do. But nevertheless, I've been hoping for more. But yeah, I think I'm going to leave it there. I hope you enjoyed the video. I am so happy for everybody that tuned in and watched the conference call. Again, conference calls are so important to watch. They really give us investors information that you wouldn't really get if you didn't watch them. Although in this one, we didn't get too much new information, but nevertheless, still important to watch. I hope you all enjoyed it. And I guess this is James from Psychedelic Investors signing out. Go Blue Jays.